Greetings and welcome back to yet another episode of the Daily Run, and today we're playing as Blue Baby. And before I go any further, I would just like to make a quick note on the fact that I said that I probably won't be uploading an Isaac daily video every single day. And the main reason for that is very simple. I would just like to leave myself some wiggle room to actually explore and maybe do some other games or maybe explore some other avenues on this channel. Not because I would like to maybe capitalize on the modern new trends that are coming out, but because there's a lot of things I'm really passionate about, and the main reason for making the channel is because I want to share those passions with other people, maybe start a discussion, maybe see where things go in some sense. And if I just maybe upload like 2 or 3 videos a week, a day, which are basically the same content, like Isaac daily videos, Dark Souls 3 and maybe something else, I feel like I'm restricting myself a lot in what I'm actually making. And while I think that's fine, and it's definitely something that I think can be favorable in a lot of positions, I just want to leave myself some wiggle room to actually record some other gameplay or maybe some other games, maybe open up some new avenues for discussion, and we actually get to that point. We'll see if it works out and then maybe we can decide from there. So in that sense, or at least in that notion, what I'm probably gonna be doing is, I'm leaving Isaac as it is. I'm gonna still play daily runs, and I probably will upload them 3 times a week, like Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays. Sometimes it's going to be a Slate Spire daily, sometimes it's going to be an Isaac daily. I think it depends, maybe mainly on my mood, or maybe I'll just like set a time slot for Slate Spire so you know what to expect. Sometimes I'll probably do a bit more, sometimes maybe I'll get a sudden burst of energy or will want to talk about something and I'll just upload daily run like on a Saturday. So I'm not really holding them as rigid, but you can definitely expect at least like 2 Isaac dailies a week. I feel like that's a good number to have. The Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays will be Dark Souls 3, and Sundays I will be actually leaving to something that's what I call soul-searching Sundays in some sense. And basically what I'll be trying to do is just maybe find games which I really enjoy but never had the chance to express because I felt like they maybe weren't a good fit for the channel, and I'll probably do some of those on Sundays, and I feel like that can be a good experience in some sense. This Sunday is just going to be Dark Souls 3 because I had some content to record like from the previous session, and then of course I have the new session, so I feel like getting it all out in this week is going to be favorable for me. But in another sense, the next week after that is probably going to be some narrative game. I'm thinking Awesome Adventures of Captain Spirit, and that might sound very cheesy in some sense, but I love Life is Strange. It's probably one of my favorite games, and I feel like playing through that one free episode in some sense, it would be a good idea because it's rather short. I can maybe gauge the reaction, I can maybe talk about some of the things I liked in Life is Strange, and of course the things I will like in that particular game. And because it's a narrative game, I think it's a little bit of a different experience as to what I'm used to, and I think that's going to be good for me because of course you're just developing as a commentator and as an entertainer in some sense, and at the same time maybe it's something you will find or you will like, and then maybe you can go and play those games yourselves and maybe have the same life-revealing revelations that I did when I first played them in some sense. That sounds a bit cheesy, but I hope at least you know what I'm talking about. So okay, all of that aside, let's focus on the game because I haven't talked about Isaac in such a long time, and it really deserves it. It's one of those games that's constant in my life. I play it, I would say quite often, not as often as maybe I would like and not as often as I used to, but it's definitely still a very big part of my life. And I actually realized I haven't played a proper daily since the latest booster pack was introduced. I did play dailies in between, but not very many, but the thing was I never really focused on daily strategy, if that makes sense. I basically just played for fun. And in this one, I tried to maybe focus on some of the strategies that I'm used to, and I actually realized that some of the things that were added did affect the game in either a positive or a negative way. I think it really depends on how you look at it, but certain things are made easier to break, and in some sense, because they're made easier to break, they're also more constant. So for example, they added Bone Heart, and it actually takes 2 hits for the Bone Heart to break, or at least 3 hits, so it's actually basically 1 more hit than any other heart in the game, and that might not seem very consequential, but the thing is, if you go into the Sacrifice Room, it actually takes 2 hits on the spikes to get rid of 1 bow heart. So essentially you actually get 2 plays for 1 heart, and you can see just how powerful that is. And in some sense it makes breaking easier for everybody who knows how to do it, but at the same time it makes it more consistent. So if you know how to do it, it's just basically there, or at least I would say it's a good thing and a bad thing in some sense. It's a bad thing because it promotes that kind of behavior which might be seen as uncompetitive, but if you're going to consider it competitive and consider it like as a part of integral strategy of the game in the daily runs, then I think it's a good thing, because it's making it, like I said, more consistent. And when you make something more consistent, it comes much more down to the player and the player knowledge and how to utilize that in order to really get the highest score possible and maybe like the shortest time. And it's not something I really thought about when I was actually going to the run, but it kind of clicked on me later that it takes 2 hits, and I feel like it's an interesting change in some sense, and bone hearts actually become much more valuable than any kind of other heart, just precisely because of this reason. And not just that, bone hearts I think are really interesting because they work a little bit differently than any other heart, but at the same time they're much more interactive. Like, you have to watch your health when you have bone hearts. In I think any other case, the only thing you're worried about is, can I pick up this red heart? And that's basically it. And I mean, sure, red hearts have some strategy behind them, like for example, certain items only trigger if you have no red hearts or if you only have half of a red heart, and that's something that I think is good for the integral strategy of the game, or at least it makes you think what your health should be or what your health must be. But beyond that, there's not much what I would call strategy, right? You basically pick up every single heart you can find, and if you don't have full red hearts, you basically pick them up and then you just heal back up to full. And maybe if you have an item, if you don't want it to go up, then you just don't pick them up in the first place. So I would say it's very binary. Either you pick them up or you don't pick them up. There's really nothing else to it. But in the case of bone hearts, it's much more, I would say, interactive, because you can kind of actively think, do I want to maybe risk 2 plays to play the blood bank, and then of course if I get hit again I just lose the bone heart permanently. It has that inherent risk versus reward, which I think is very prominent, or at least was very prominent in Isaac prior to like some of the DLCs that were made. And I feel like it's kind of going back to the original roots. But if we're gonna talk about like the mechanics of bone hearts, I think they're really interesting. But I think just as a soul, or at least like as an item that exists in the game, it's not really done that well. It feels like a bit dissonant, I would say, because red hearts, okay, they make sense in the context of the game in some sense, because you kind of have them, they're your essential health. Of course there's a lot of red hearts. I think soul hearts make sense in the context of the game as well, because they're kind of like as a temporary shield. I feel like they make sense as a game mechanic. But introducing bone hearts on top of that, while they're interesting, I don't feel like really they bring anything new to the table at the same time. They're just not so fundamentally different from any other kind of heart that I would say, well, this is so much more special. But when you introduce them in a daily environment, which I think encourages a different kind of play, the fact that they actually take 2 hits to break and kind of give you 2 plays for 1 is something that's definitely noteworthy in some sense. But it's just, I think, a consequence of something that they really haven't planned for, but it's really interesting to see how it develops as you go through the game, and maybe certain things interact with other things in very unpredictable manners. And that can happen in a lot of games, but I think Isaac is very prominent in this, just basically for how many different mechanics there are in the game. And not just how many different items there are, which interact in ways which you would never expect, but really just so many different mechanics in the game which are affected by one another. And I feel like that's, I mean, not I think, but I know this is what makes Isaac so replayable. And the fact we can keep exploring and kind of finding out these new little things, if they're even after we've been playing this game for so long, I think is a good testament just to how well designed the game is. And honestly, at a certain point, I thought that there would be things as too many mechanics, like when they just keep adding new hearts and new items. I felt like at a certain point it just gets tiresome, because then it becomes very obvious which items are good or maybe which things are bad, and maybe what you should do and what you shouldn't do. But I feel like there's always an opportunity to use a certain item or like a certain mechanic that you never thought about using before because of some very specific circumstances that occurred in that particular run. While it might not happen often, it might happen like once in 1,000 times. When you actually think about it and when you're actually able to execute it, it's one of the most satisfying things in the world. As is this run, because we managed to rank into 8th place, and that hasn't happened in quite a while to get a single-digit score. But it's so satisfying to see, because I feel like I've put a lot of energy and thought into daily runs and just Isaac in general, and the fact that I'm still able to rank relatively well when I haven't played in such a long time is very inspiring. It just kind of makes me want to keep going and keep learning, and it's exactly what I keep saying. I think if you have good fundamentals, no matter how many times you get hit, if you just know maybe the daily strategy in some sense, you're actually able to land a really good score. But of course the end score does lie a little bit, because while there are still a lot of players which I would say are dedicated, obviously very experienced because they've played a lot of dailies in their past, I think there's also a lot of players who either bought the game anew because of the Steam sale and they're just basically trying to complete the achievements and just get some of those unlocks. So I think the entire field is a little bit softer and a little bit less competitive, so I think it's a little bit easier to get a higher score, but still, I'm still glad about the good ranking, and it's just really nice to be back. So with all of that said, I hope you enjoyed this one, guys, and I hope to see you next time.